lounging, son.
Welcome back to the Comic Lounge. My name's Ryan. Back with me, my always amazing co-host. I got Manny with me, and we are going to be talking about a book that is criminally not talked about enough. Spider-Man Reign by the great Kaare Andrews, with coloring by Jose Villarrubia. But I noticed he only did the last 3 issues. I'm pretty sure Kaare did, or at least they didn't credit Jose on the covers, because I'm reading from the single issues.
Yeah, because it does say artist Kaare Andrews with, and then in parentheses in my collected. So
yeah, okay, so yeah, he did everything on the first one, but then the other 3, Jose Villarrubia colors it, who's an amazing colorist, by the way.
Yeah,
he's been recoloring like the old Len Wein and Bernie Wrightson Swamp Thing for the Absolute Edition that they did.
Oh, really?
I haven't read it yet. It's sitting on my shelf. I went through like a little binge buying of a bunch of Absolutes recently, so I have like 6 or 7 Absolutes that I just haven't even cracked open. But that one is like the first one I'm going to read. But anyway, so like right before we were recording, we were talking about it. This is edited by Axel Alonso, and this is around the time, I think maybe he came a little bit before this, but he moved from Vertigo. Vertigo is where he was prior to this. Right at this point, he's just editing. But he does eventually become editor-in-chief of Marvel for a little bit. And it's kind of funny because we've been talking about Preacher recently. This video will probably drop before I drop a Preacher episode. But anyways, we've been kind of banking we're going to go through the entire Preacher series. We're banking a few before we start posting. But Axel Alonso, I agree. Like you said, one of my favorite editors too. He's responsible for a lot of stuff that I love in comics, and especially what he did during his time at Marvel, bringing in so many indie creators and doing so many projects like this, where it's not a book you would expect, like Peter Bagg on a Spider-Man comic, or the Strange Tales and stuff, getting like a Jaime Hernandez in there, a Gilbert.
Because the Tangled Web series was during his reign too.
Yeah. I mean,
and I want to say I'm not sure because I know Joe Quesada eventually became, but didn't Axel also sort of bring in the whole Marvel Knights? Was that him?
That was Quesada. So Joe Quesada and Joey Palmiotti it launched in '98. So they obviously were working on it before, but they had their own event comics, like that they were publishing their book Ash, Painkiller Jane. Then Marvel gave them carte blanche to kind of gave them a list of stuff that they could do. So they did Daredevil, Punisher, Black Panther, and Humans was the fourth one with Jay Lee. So like they kind of revamped those characters and like blew people away. That Black Panther run by Christopher Priest is still talked about today. Kevin Smith and Joe Quesada launching Daredevil, eventually getting David Mack, Brian Bendis, all that good stuff. And then from there, he became editor-in-chief, and then Axel Alonso, it comes in shortly after that. But it was a very, very exciting time at Marvel. I think that's kind of more when I read more Marvel, to be honest with you. I don't think I was reading as much Marvel back then. I mean, I would have been 11 at the time when Marvel Knights launched, so I was mostly a DC guy. I'd pick up some Spider-Man stuff and some random stuff, some Captain America or whatever during the Hero's Return. But this really started an amazing era for Marvel that led into the early 2000s, and it kind of tapers off a little bit, but it's still, it kicked off a lot of big names in the industry and gave some of the best stories. The Ultimate line, was around that time. That's before he was editor-in-chief. But okay, so let's talk about Spider-Man Reign. So Kaare Andrews, I love his art style. I think it's we talked about Jim Rugg being a chameleon. Kaare Andrews too does a lot of different styles, works in a lot of different mediums when he does his covers to his interiors, like to the point where you may not even be able to tell that it's the same artist sometime with the way he can kind of adapt with different styles. This on the surface is, to me, I would compare it to like a Dark Knight Returns with Spider-Man. I mean, that's like the basic elevator pitch I would give to somebody if I had to describe it. It's kind of a last Spider-Man story. We're gonna spoil this, obviously. This book's been out since 2007, I think, is when this book launched. Yeah, February 2007 is what the indicia says. I mean, just from like the first cover, he's looking worse for wear, dude. He's hugging the gravestone of Mary Jane Watson Parker. the openings, you get a little flashback. Like this kind of like lets you know like that shit's gone wrong in New
Right,
York.
yeah. It's sometime in the future. It seems like they've outlawed. I mean, just to tell you the basic plot, it is, it's New York sometime in the future. Not only has Spider-Man been gone, but it seems that all masked vigilantes and heroes have been gone for a while, outlawed. There's the reign of the title is sort of a paramilitary police force that sort
Mhm.
of runs New York under the orders and executions of the mayor. And it's become a fascist state basically. Where like, yeah, people are quote unquote protected, but they have no rights. This and that. It's like, like you said, it's a parallel to what Miller was doing with Gotham in Dark Knight Returns. In fact, there's little Easter eggs in this
Yeah.
that sort of, yeah, like the reporter well, first of all, he uses the same trope that Miller did in Dark Knight, where he's using newscasting as a way to drive the narrative forward. So you have like talking head panels with a
Right,
newscaster
but he
literally
does it a little
reporting.
bit different though. He has like the
He does,
full, like he does like the full, instead of it just being like boxes. I like that actually
yeah.
a little
It
bit
was,
better than.
yeah. I like this better. Yeah, yeah. Same thing that McFarlane did in early Spawn. A lot of people, when Miller did that, a lot of people took that because admittingly, it is a very cool like narrative tool because like it gives you something different and it's a way to give you exposition that doesn't seem forced to me. It just seems like you're being pulled further into the world by seeing this media aspect of it.
Mhm.
And I like the joke here that the reporter we're watching, his name is Miller Jansen. So it's like Frank Miller and Klaus Jansen, like their last names. Yeah. Little things like that just show you like what a comic book fan Kari is himself. You're right about the art, man. Like he does this is some of the best art he's done, and that's saying a lot because like pretty much everything he's drawn is really fucking good. But to me, I don't know, maybe because I read it digitally and I made the screen real bright and everything, but like it almost seemed animated to me. And that's something that I've
Oh, it
always
does
seen
feel
about his
animated.
art. It's very fluid, like you can almost see the movement in it. It's so atmospheric, like it's constantly raining in a lot of these scenes, and like he uses that to add movement to, I think, to the panels. Like I, I keep using the word movement, and that's kind of what this comic book felt like. Like the art and the narrative like had a very good pace and a very good movement. I had read it when it originally came out, but it'd been years. I mean, you said when it came out in 2007, you said,
Yeah.
or so. I mean, it's probably been about that long since I read it, so it was kind of like reading it for the first time.
Yeah, I mean, I think that like it's Kaare Andrews just has a very kinetic style about him,
Kinetic is a good word, man.
and
Yes.
everything he does just has an energy. Like he's been doing this series. Well, there's 2 volumes of it out now called Erratic, from AWA, and it's kind of like a Spider-Man type hero. Like it's a young kid who gets powers and stuff. And if you haven't read it, anybody listening watching YouTube, Manny, if you haven't read it, it's a really
I
dope book.
haven't
I
actually.
really
Yeah.
enjoyed the first volume. I haven't read the second one yet. Yeah, it's all him, and he kind of did it for his kids. Because I interviewed him a while back, maybe a year and a half ago, maybe longer. I don't know. Time
Same.
is
Yeah.
time is very hard to judge right now
Yeah.
ever
Yeah.
since the
I
pandemic.
interviewed him too. One of the best interviews I've ever done was with him.
Yeah, dude, and he's just like he's such a smart and like the conversation is like he's very
He's very
intellectual.
articulate.
Yeah,
Yeah.
very articulate, dude. And yeah, he just loves the medium of comics, and it's so evident. Like his covers are some of my favorite covers. Like I rarely will buy a comic just for a cover, but I usually like I'll buy a Liefeld cover. Like when he did the Deadpool 30 for 30, I bought those. And then Kaare Andrews has been doing these like homage covers with like the 90s, like the corner boxes and stuff, or he'll do it with the 90s Marvel logo, which is probably my favorite logo in comics besides the
Me
DC
too.
Bullet.
I
But
love the
anyways,
DC Bill.
yeah. But just I love this. And after you get the flashback, we meet Peter, he just like it's back to being like he's a loser again. You know what I
Yeah.
mean? Like
Yeah.
he's old, he's back to wearing a little bow tie and
He's
stuff.
getting. He's literally getting fired, which is something we always saw Peter going through, like in those early Spider Mans. Like
Getting
it's
fired, and then
yeah.
he then he tries to stop, gets hit by something. He just starts. Oh yeah, he does get beat up. He gets like tossed on the ground. And this is a little girl, right? Yeah, it's the little girl that we
Yes.
end up. She ends up being like a main focal point, and like talking about the
Yeah.
parallels. She's like the
Yeah. She's Sandman's daughter.
she's like the Carrie Kelly of the book, you know, like she's
Yeah.
kind of a focal point for us as the reader into this world. Because yes, we deal with Peter, but like she's the one that's really observing what's happening. So she's us. She's watching everything kind of play out. So she's always like she has her moments where she's narrating.
She's an orphan and part of like if people haven't read it, like there's a group of kids that obviously like are all street kids and like they sort of live in an abandoned church, and she's kind of fallen in with those kids who we also learn have been J. Jonah Jameson, who's like sort of no longer involved with the Daily Bugle. The Daily Bugle has actually been bought by like a media conglomerate and turned into like this like right wing, like almost like Fox News like sort of a network that pretty much, at least to me, seems to be like almost like state sanctioned news. Like they're in league with like the fascist government. So it's basically become a propaganda machine for the government. So like,
Yeah, kind of like what Fox News is now.
Exactly. Yeah. Exactly. Yeah. That's why. Exactly, man. I was trying to make that analogy. So it's fucked, man. You know what I mean? Like you can tell how fascist it is, and it's not downright said, but you can almost feel like New York is almost like its own microcosm. We don't
Yeah.
really know what's going on in the rest of the country, but like the mayor even has this plan to create this thing called the web with
Yeah,
two
right
B's.
here.
Yeah, which is sort of like a electronic net that's going to cover New York, and the tagline is "No one in, no one out," keeping you safe. But like when you look at that slogan, that's not a protective slogan, man. That sounds
No.
like you're a prisoner, you know? Like they're definitely trying to make New York into like I think a seceded like fascist state within the country. But again, we don't know what's going on in the rest of the country because Kari simply focuses on New York in this.
Yeah, there's not even any mention of
No,
other heroes, nothing, dude. It's just, and I
which
kind
is
of, I
which is
like that.
good. Yes, because like it makes the story like easier to read. You don't need to have like a lot of information about the Marvel universe. I mean, like Dark Knight Returns, this is something that you can give to anyone with even like the most passing knowledge of Spider-Man, someone who's only seen the movies and just kind of knows the basic things about Peter Parker that we all know. You know, he's Spider-Man, great power, responsibility, married to Mary Jane, used to work for the Daily Bugle. You know, most people, even if they haven't read the comics, know that. So you can give them the story, and they're going to get a satisfactory experience from it. You know, and like you said, it does almost work as the last Spider-Man story. You know, with whatever period you might have read Spider-Man, if you read it at all. So
Yeah.
it's to me, it's kind of like an evergreen property that way.
Yeah, and I love the way he uses like to just like kind of make the scene like this person look creepy, just like as simple as him taking a bite of steak, you
Yeah,
know?
he's very cinematic. I know he's also a filmmaker. He's
Yeah,
made
he is.
a couple of films, and I think he's directed television before too. I think for the Disney Channel, directed animation. So like you're talking about an artist that is pulling from different media and like like different tools. I mean, his tool chest is huge.
Mhm.
So you're gonna get that kind of stuff. Like this is a very prestige looking comic book, and we were again talking more about this before we started recording, but like Marvel doesn't really do a lot of books like this anymore, and I wish they would. Like these sort of like very original one-off projects, like giving artists like free reign, like no pun intended,
Yeah.
to go ahead and like do something very special. And I mean, look at what it delivered. It's fantastic.
Yeah, I mean, I feel like they're kind of starting to do it again. Like we had like
Yes,
the Trad Moore Doctor Strange, we had the
yes,
the Beta
you're right.
Ray
Yeah,
the Beta Ray Bill by Daniel Warren Johnson. Kaare
correct.
Andrews
Yeah.
just did that amazing fantasy book
Oh,
a
dude,
little
I
while ago.
forgot. I mean, I have all those in single issue. Those were fantastic.
Yeah, so like it feels like they're kind of starting to do it, but I do think it's a missed opportunity. I think even like what DC's doing with Black Label, like they're not really they're not utilizing it as well as I think that they could. And I'm sure I'm not the only person that thinks that. I get
Yeah.
like you have to do Batman books because they're going to sell, but I feel like you could bring in some creators where the creator will sell that book. The name
Yeah.
will sell the book. And I'm sure that if you find like a Kaare Andrews or you find like a Daniel Warren Johnson, like he did Beta Ray Bill. Like that book had, I mean, I'm not trying to be mean. Like I love that character, but that book had no business being as good as it was. You know what I mean? Like
Yeah. Yeah.
nobody, it's not a character you would think like that would be an unbelievable book. So DC and Marvel both should really be bringing in some of these top talent creators and kind of saying what story do you want to tell? What character do you want to work with? And then just do it. Because
Yeah.
if it's a big enough name, the book will sell. You know what I mean? And I think that especially those creators with big names that know how to market themselves and know how to get on social media and promote their shit, it's going to sell. Like we talked about Chad Moore, like not really, you don't really see him out there talking about his Doctor Strange book. Daniel Warren Johnson was talking about Beta Ray Bill. He was out there,
Yeah,
you
he
know?
was.
And same with Kari. Kari was talking about Amazing Fantasy. I remember. But I do love this book. I remember reading it years ago. I didn't read it when it first came out. I got it in trade, but it was shortly after it was released in the singles. But I love his use of like red herrings throughout the book, where you think it's going somewhere
and there's
and
a
it's
lot of
not.
misdirection, and
Like
it's done really
even
well.
like I was talking about with this character, the mayor. Like spoiler, he makes it seem like he's like the brains behind it, and it ends up not being the brains, you know, at all. It ends up being somebody like that you wouldn't expect once the reveal happens.
I
Like
mean, we can. I mean, it's an old comic, and we can spoil it. Like who
yeah,
the real villain at the end? It's well, it's not even Venom. It's the symbiote suit. You know, like that's
he's attached to the assistant of the
yeah.
mayor. But the mayor, you really feel like this motherfucker, like who is he? Like what is he really about? Like I didn't even like I remember reading, and even
He's just a
now,
puppet. You know.
I'll be honest with you, reading it, I didn't remember that it was the
Yeah, me
symbiote.
neither.
Like
I
it
mean,
didn't cross my mind.
and then like the scene when you find out surprised me as much now as it did when I first read it, which is when Jameson stabs him and he's like, "There you are." Like Jameson was already sort of figuring out things, you know.
Mm-hmm.
Because it seems like in the story, which I love what he did with Jameson. Also, it's that it seems to me like Jameson had some kind of fall from grace himself, and then like he became almost this like paranoid person who ends up being right about a lot of things. And like it's interesting that he's the one that sort of like comes to Peter, you know, and is
Yeah.
like gives him the mask, and it's just like you need to come back, you know, like
Well, I know because he talks about like how like everybody else left, we're the only ones that stayed behind. Like,
yeah,
who is he referring to as everybody left? You know, like that's. But I love that Peter, like just in issue 1 when Peter comes home, like you start seeing that like he's imagining Mary Jane being there. Like he actually
yeah,
talks to her, right? And throughout, you really don't know. And he like even this like I love this. I love these 3 like where he's sitting with her,
yes,
and then you get this, and he just looks and he gets sad and he says, "I'm sorry." And you don't find out what happens. At least I think maybe it was issue 3 where we find out. It's hard for me to remember, but it's towards the end of the series where you find out what happens with Mary Jane. And insane. Like what a crazy concept of like
she got cancer from him.
the radiation
Uh-huh.
that he had in his body from becoming Spider-Man was poisoning her.
Yeah,
Like that's
it's in
crazy.
his saliva.
Like
Like anytime they kissed, like you know, like
yeah, like I
everything.
wouldn't even have thought about that. Like that's an
Yeah,
insane concept to think of, and that he was the reason she died. Like that's like the ultimate
it
fucking
it
thing of
explains
Parker
why he
luck,
would.
of Parker's
It
shitty
explains
luck.
like because you know I think a lot of the people that had like that weren't about this series at first said that like it was too much of a it's too dark for Peter. He's not this kind of a dark character. But you know what? A character can be made any which way by a creator who does it very well. And I think when you put that specifically into context, that it was Peter's radiated blood and body that killed her, all this story makes sense because that would turn Peter into what we see in this book. Old, alone, angry, not even using his powers because he almost wants to deny he ever even had them because it literally ruined the one thing he loved most in his life, and like he literally gave up everything, and he does it in such a clever way because like you said, we just mentioned that, but upon hearing that, we already get it. So we don't need a lot of scenes of him like saying, "Oh, I'm giving up being Spider-Man." We just know as soon as you know that he was responsible for her death for that reason, the story clicks.
Yeah.
And where we find Peter in the story just makes sense to me.
Yeah, I mean, I'd argue that Peter has been dark. I mean, he fucking lost Gwen Stacy.
You're
He's,
right.
you know what I
Yeah, I
mean?
mean,
Like,
yeah,
I would argue
yeah,
that
that's
there's a
true
lot
too.
of
Yeah,
moments where Peter goes to a dark place. Like,
I mean, his
maybe it's
origin is
yeah, maybe the tones and the coloring makes this seem like a darker comic, So like the atmosphere seems dark, but he's had a lot of shit happen to him. You know what I mean? He
yeah,
even had Aunt May die, and then had to end his marriage to keep her alive. How is that not dark?
Yeah.
You know, like
Yeah.
giving up
Yeah. That's true.
like losing your aunt and then having to be like, what do I do? You know, like that's a very dark moment in his fucking life too. So I would argue that there's lots of moments where Peter's dark. This is just more ominous and in the entire series. But
it's a culmination of all of it. And to me it does seem like a very plausible future for him.
Oh, for sure. And I do love the J. Jonah Jameson. I mean, just look at him looking just super haggard. He comes there, he brings him the camera, and Peter's just like, he's like telling him to come back. And you're like, does he know? Doesn't he know? But it's obvious that he does, you know? And just J. Jonah Jameson just being crazy, like this crazy old codger, like bashing a car and stuff, and then like getting like beat down by these fucking soldiers who kind of remind me of is it the Wrecker? I think
from the Wrecking Crew.
From the Wrecking Crew,
yeah, the guy that has like the mystical crowbar or whatever.
Yeah.
Like,
But you just see like J. Jonah Jameson just getting beat, dude, and he's just like, what does he say? I'm sorry for all of it, boy. We have so much to talk about. And then this panel,
I love that panel.
Yeah, it's great.
I mean, again, invoking Dark Knight Returns with the lightning and it's like all of that. I love that he embraced, because I'm sure when he conceived this story, it was inspired by Dark Knight. And as soon as he got the idea, I would imagine that like you cannot escape that people are going to compare it to Dark Knight. So why not embrace that and use that to your advantage? And like at this point, you know, Dark Knight Returns has a bunch of tropes that have been used in many stories. So like what Kari's doing here is he's making a lot of them his own. Like you said, yes, I said he used the newscasting, but he made it his own by giving you a different look to it, you know, like using it in a slightly different way. So it's not like a copycat or like you know, like just Spider-Man Dark Returns or whatever you want to call it. It is its own thing. It's just being inspired by that kind of a story. But I do love that page, man. There's so many moments and pages that I love. Like I love these two pages that are just white. And I think one of my favorite pages is that one. Just like the tiny little Spider-Man and like the large crowd underneath. I'm like so atmospheric, man. So
I really love this moment where he's like, he's young, he's talking to Aunt May, then he's a little bit older talking to Mary Jane, talking to Uncle Ben, and then finally he's talking to J. Jonah Jameson. But yeah, I think that you're so right, dude. There are so many moments within this series, and it's only like 4 issues. Here. Oh, I love that.
Dude, so much happens.
That's fucking creepy, dude. Like that's towards the end of the book when so basically like the Sinister Six comes back and is hired to they're taken out of prison to take down Spider-Man, who's now come back, and he's not the normal Spider-Man. I love though that I have to mention this because I'm gonna forget, is that he's so like depressed and so like lost in the beginning, but he puts that mask on and the quips come out. And he's immediately he's Spider-Man again, you know, like even though he's old as shit, not old as shit, but he's old and he's battered and beaten, dude. Like he's wearing a cast in that image. For sake. And
I love that too, is that it shows you that like, yes, Peter is still a superhero and has super strength, but like anyone else, the older he got, he probably got a little weaker, and that doesn't mean that his bones don't still break and all that. Like, and you know, and you could tell he's older, his spider sense doesn't work as well. Like, you know, he's a little slower, but that doesn't stop him from going out there and fighting and kicking ass. And you're so right about that. Like, he's all depressed, he's sad, but the moment he puts on the mask, it's like he remembers why he enjoyed wearing it in the first place. You know, like it's something that is a vital part of him. And that this page I showed, like, I wanted to talk about it briefly too. Like you mentioned that the Sinister Six came back. I love the idea of what they did with Dr. Octopus, is that he's dead, and like the arms, which have always sort of had an artificial intelligence component to them, are still doing all the thinking now, but still walking around with his fucking rotting corpse.
Yeah.
Like, you know, it's so creepy, man. It's so creepy and so good. Like one of my favorite things in the book was that sort of take on Dr. Octopus.
Oh yeah, I loved it because he's getting his ass beat by the Sinister Six, and then essentially the arms save him. They take him away from it, and he's like he left the arms to Peter, which is also weird.
Well, I mean, you know, when you consider the things that happened in like Superior Spider-Man, and you look at the history, like
right, but that wasn't there though.
No, you're right. You're right. But I mean,
So
I want to say that Doc Ock always had some kind of like weird. I mean, at least maybe I'm just pulling from things that came afterward. But
yeah.
like, there was always some kind of like respect there. I think, you know, as fellow scientists and all
Yeah, I
that.
guess you're right. Like, I mean, for
It
me,
didn't seem out of place in the story, is what I
no,
want
it
to say.
didn't.
So I don't. Yeah.
But for me, I guess, yeah. I mean, like prior to this, Spider-Man 2 came out, right?
Yeah.
With Tobey Maguire and Alfred Molina. So there was that connection there. So maybe that was more in Kari's mind too when he was
Yeah.
writing this, because yeah, like obviously throughout the history, Doc Ock's like in love with Aunt May at
Yeah.
points, you know, stuff like that. I just had to mention, look at this fucking ad for the Ghost Rider video game.
I know, dude. Yeah,
This is what I
I'm
love. This
kind
is
of
what I
jealous
love
that you
about
still have
memes.
the single issues because I love ads from comics and like it's such a snapshot. I love looking at
Yeah.
that stuff.
It's funny because the reason I even mentioned this was because on the kayfabe ringside seats, the trade group, I don't have my trade anymore. I don't know where it is. So I saw somebody selling this and I snapped it up. And that's why I was like, let's read it, because I had it in my read pile. And I'm like, I got to read this book. We got to talk about it. And I'm so excited. I'm so happy that I bought this again, because also, like we said, it's like a new experience all over again. I didn't remember a lot of it. And the scene, like we were talking about with J. Jonah Jameson, where he stabs the mayor because he knows that something's weird, right? And then as he stabs him, he realizes, oh shit, you're not who I like. He thought it was Venom. He
Yeah,
thought it
yeah.
was. He
Well,
thought
I
that.
think Jameson had figured out it was Venom. He just wasn't sure who Venom had bonded with at this point.
Right. And I love that you know, the little girl in the book, like also like a red herring, you don't think she's really anybody, right? Like you just think she's this girl and she's running with this crew, which also kind of is a parallel to the Sons of the Bat, right? From Dark Knight
Yes, correct.
Returns.
Yeah.
And how they team up, and like the youth and then the military is like going after them and they're ready to kill, and Sandman is really the only one that's like, there's children here. Like we
Yeah,
can't do
which
that.
is very much in character for him because he always like was
he's
kind of
he's
like that.
towed the line of being, he's also been, hasn't he been an Avenger?
He was, yeah, he was a
Yeah,
reserve
so like
Avenger.
he's been a hero, he's been on the side of good. So watching him do that and then realizing that that was his daughter, and that
And the way
moment.
it's done is so amazing because she's obviously a mutant because her power kicks in like at a traumatic like stressful moment, and it's so well done because she just turns into concrete, you know, which is basically another form of sand, you know, in a different form. So it makes sense there, and like it's such a beautiful and tender moment, like how Sandman reacts to it. You know, she gets shattered and he tries to put her together, and it's very tragic. Like it was an unexpected way to flesh out even another character, which just adds more depth to the story. I think, you know, like
Yeah, I think one of the best moments too is when he crawls in to Mary Jane's coffin.
yes,
And then and you're just like, I remember reading it the first time. I remember reading this, I'm like, what the fuck is he doing, dude, you know? And then all of a sudden you just see that fist pop out and he's wearing his old school red and blues, you know? And from there it's just like he gets the courage. He knows what he's got to do, you know?
yeah,
He's got to take it down, everybody down. I love like just this. Look at how much energy is in that page, dude. And
yes,
just the quips of like Electro and Hydro Man decide they're gonna team up, and he's like, he's just the lamest team up ever. And it's true because like you
yeah.
can't mix water and electricity, so he takes them out. And then I love how the scene with Mysterio too is another great moment, saying you should never imitate a dead man's wife or a man's
Yeah.
dead wife
I
unless
do love how like
unless he pays you to.
I
So
do love how easily like once Peter is back and like you know he's sort of in his Spider-Man like persona again, like he really does fucking whoop ass and kicks like the Sinister Six ass. Is like, you know,
yeah,
it's like the old Peter is back, man. Like you said, quipping, you know, like outsmarting and outfighting them, you know, like he's back. Like at this point, Peter is just back in his full persona, his full faculties, and it's great to see, you know, like
yeah. And I think what's great too is that, you know, when he's just wearing the black costume, I don't really feel it. But once he puts the red and blue on, it's like it's Ditko. It's completely the
yeah,
Ditko version of Spider-Man, like the
yes,
creepy
like this
eyes.
sort of weird angular, yeah, yeah. And I that's we're on the same length because the wavelength because like I was gonna mention that like this book also has a very creepy vibe to it overall, from like the design of the characters to the way they're drawn. But when you look at those original Spider-Man comics, that's the vibe they had, you know? Like Ditko didn't draw them to be like super like, you know, like good looking and all this. Like Spider-Man always had a weird vibe to it, you know, and that's been in its DNA from the very beginning. So for Kari to sort of pick that and do his own take on it makes me know that he really was looking at the entire, like, you know, run of Spider-Man comics and seeing as being making this a possible end, specifically for those early, because obviously most of the Sinister Six did debut in those early Ditko issues. I think almost all of them did.
All of them. I don't think
Yeah.
Hydro Man. I feel like Hydro
Yeah,
Man
I don't
was
think
later.
Hydro Man, and obviously Venom, you know, the main villain of this piece was later. But the Sinister Six was from Ditko's era, and Venom arguably is probably the biggest villain to be added to Spider-Man's mythos in his later years. So that was also a good choice. And what a way to use Venom, man. Over the years, Venom has become like a really cool character. But for a while there, everyone was shitting on Venom, saying that it was like a silly idea. Not me. I've always liked Venom. I always thought he was a cool character. Mm-hmm. Probably because he came out at the time I was actively reading Spider-Man. But the way Kari uses Venom in this is so creepy to me, and such a great idea. Basically, like at this point, like Venom, you know, at the end, like he just spawns into like a bunch of different symbiotes, all still sharing like the same brain, which is again years before Donny Cates and everyone who's been adding stuff to the Venom mythos recently even did this stuff. So Kari was already sort of like, I think he was almost like ahead of the curve in a lot of things that are being done with the character now, you know, and you see it a lot. And he basically uses Venom, as I think he works best, as almost like a horror character.
I agree. Yeah. I think it was all his choices were pretty spot on, you know, and just like Venom still just hating Peter, you know, like it's just that's inherent in him. And for abandoning him, man. He's like, you brought me here. You brought me here to this planet, you know, and it's just like it's true. It's because like the symbiote is a living thing, and he's like, you took me from here, you brought me, and then you abandoned me, and just like that whole interaction and that whole dynamic, I think was such a smart choice because it's not just like a villain wanting to be a villain, you know, it's not just I got to take you down to take you down. It's like abandonment issues, you know, so that adds a completely different like level to like,
because a symbiote being a symbiote by nature is literally and emotionally attached to the subject, to the host, and to the host. Yeah. So like when Peter rejected it, like it's one of those things that you and I have talked about that makes Peter so great is that he's flawed. It's like he never even stopped to think that it was a living thing that maybe he should at least try. Okay, so I don't want to be its host anymore, but maybe I should find a place for it rather than just giving it to Reed Richards and sticking it in a fucking test tube, basically. You know, like it's kind of a dick act.
I mean, we've talked about it though, right? Like Peter, he's a dick and he's selfish at times. And like, yeah, I love Spider-Man. Yeah, he's a hero. But going back to those early days, I think you and I mentioned it too. The Ditko Lee stuff, right? Before Romita comes on, Pete, it's like he's not like a character you want to root for sometimes. He's kind of douchey, you know? So like to kind of hear that, and that's also to me like he's pulling from those early days because like it shows that at times Peter is selfish. He is only thinking about himself. And that doesn't necessarily make him a bad person, or it
just makes him a real person.
Exactly. So I think that, you know, overall this is probably one of the best Spider-Man stories. I think, like I said at the beginning of the episode, it's criminally not talked about enough. Yeah. And I love,
to the point where like it's one that like I'd almost forgotten about until you mentioned it, you know, like, and not because it didn't have an impact on me. It's just like there's so many other things that get talked about, you know?
Agreed. I mean, it's like Ultimate Spider-Man is usually like one of the main ones that people talk about over the last like 20 something years, you know? And then obviously you talk about the Lee Ditko, Death of Gwen Stacy, you talk about that stuff. And then even mentions kind of like Kraven's Last Hunt is kind of a throwaway like conversation between him and Kraven in here. That's another big story, you know? But this one, yeah, I feel like it kind of got lost in the shuffle, you know, and it's a shame, dude, because it is such a great book. And I really have rarely heard somebody mention this book, to be honest with you.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, you're the first person I've ever actually really talked about it with, even, you know, even though like it I don't remember at the time how heavily solicited it was or what kind of an impact. I just don't. But from the looks of it, I mean, this was a project that, like, I mean, it was its own thing. I think the issues were printed probably like on better paper than the usual monthlies. Like, it was definitely like a pristine. I mean, you have the issue.
It was a cardstock cover. So that, like, I mean, look, the price point was $4 at this point.
That was a while ago.
Yeah, that was a while ago. So comics were not like $4 like they are now. I mean, like, they're going to 5 and 6 now too. But yeah, I think that, and even the ending, you think Peter's dead, but he's not. And it kind of also like plays into that Dark Knight Returns, where in Dark Knight Returns, Bruce is sitting in the cave. He faked his death. Now, I wouldn't necessarily say that Peter faked his death here. It just gave the illusion that he was dying. And it kind of like, it has a cool little send-off to where you could have done more. If this book came out now, I feel like there would have been spin-offs.
Oh yeah, Spider-Man Reign, like Doc Ock, or Spider-Man Reign Venom, Spider-Man Reign, like.
Yeah, so like I kind of like that there's no spin-offs. I kind of like that it is a one and done, and it doesn't like cheapen the story. And I don't think that necessarily do sequels always cheapen the story, but I don't think we needed another Dark Knight. Like, to be honest.
No, yeah, we didn't need it, and this doesn't need a sequel or anything. It's just perfect the way it is, and it's a story that I would hope people read more, like you said, because it is criminally underrated. I believe it's still in print, so
I don't know. I don't want to say it is or it isn't. I mean, obviously you can get it digitally, I'm sure.
Yeah,
but
it's on Comixology and also on Comixology Unlimited. So you can, if you have Comixology Unlimited, you can just download it to your device and read it without having to buy it. But I know I looked for it online, and I'm not sure if it's currently printed or not. But there are copies and ways to read it out there.
Yeah.
I mean, I've seen this at like my local library too a bunch of times. So like, I know it's a book that sold pretty decently at the time, because if something on Comixology, usually it's going to have a certain amount of readership. So, and I do know that it was, for the most part, I mean, like everything, it had its haters, but it was pretty critically acclaimed at the time, and like, it was considered a special project, and to give Kaare a project like this, like, there was a lot of faith behind him and behind the project.
Yeah,
I mean, that goes back probably to Axel Alonso, who, like we said, is a great editor and like was really good at catching a really good project and, like, letting the creator run wild and do what they do best.
Yeah, because I feel like I asked him about this book, and I feel like he hadn't done a ton at this point. So like they really like took a little bit of a risk doing this book, with Kaare. I don't think he was a household name yet. I don't think he was as acclaimed as he later has become. But yeah, I think that if you take one thing away from this episode, like, this is, and you love Spider-Man, like, you have to read this book. Like, however you can, make sure you get out there and
it's
read
a very unique Spider-Man story, one that definitely fits in the overall, like, grand arc of Spider-Man as a character. And as you said, Ryan, criminally undercovered. Like it's just, you don't see enough about this book talked about when people talk about great Spider-Man stories, and it really is one. It's just a great comic book. You don't even have to be, like I said, you don't even have to be you can be the most casual of Spider-Man fans, and you're still gonna like this story, because it's using like the beats that most people that pay attention to pop culture will know.
Mm-hmm.
Very recognizable villains, but by no means is that being is it being phoned in, or just sort of like, like trying to be a carbon copy of Dark Knight. It just takes the kernel of the idea of what Dark Knight is and reinterprets it as a Spider-Man story, and it works very well.
Yeah,
totally. Works very well.
Yeah, it's a great book. Go pick it up. Yeah, that's all I got on Spider-Man Reign. So, like I said, go find a way to pick it up, eBay it, Amazon, whatever. Check your shops. Maybe they have some older printings of the trade, because I don't know that it is still being in print, because Marvel sometimes, like, they let stuff lapse a lot, and then you have to wait years for them to
check those dollar bins. You can probably find some in dollar bins here and there, like, and that's not a dig, because Sometimes you
I
find
see
the
a
most
lot of good
amazing.
stuff. Yeah, I see a lot of good
Oh,
stuff in
dude,
dollar bins.
going through dollar bins is literally one of my favorite things in the world. So
Yeah,
you're
same
always
here.
gonna find great things there in there.
Same here. So make sure you go pick up the book and make sure you follow Manny. I'll have all of his links down below. Make sure you follow Comic Lounge and subscribe to the YouTube channel and hit the bell icon so you're notified every time a new vid goes up. And on that note, we're out.